becomes a tumor cell. It's called transformation. One of the interesting aspects of that is that it actually involves reawakening a gene expression program that frequently has not been active since early embryonic development. And that's why I'm showing this here. Very early in your embryonic development, there were specific gene expression programs that allowed for cell proliferation, differentiation of these cells into different levels and layers of tissue. And here you are at 10 weeks gestation. Weren't you cute? Look at you. Anyway, this didn't take very long, did it? And what you're looking at is the action of a great deal of cellular proliferation, differentiation, and also cellular migration. In your early embryonic development, what was going on is cells, when they were proliferating, they were migrating to establish cellular layers, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And these were the cells that would then differentiate into the different kinds of tissues: the bone, the muscle, the nerves, the skin, the brain, the viscera, and respiratory organs. All of these various different tissues and organs all originated from the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. Okay. And so what happens in the process of transformation is that the tumor cell will oftentimes reawaken genes that have not been expressed and not needed since your early embryonic period. And it's just by accident. It's just by accident that cells that are becoming transformed will reawaken some of these genes, and all of a sudden the cell will then take on behaviors that the body hasn't seen since your very beginning. Okay. And so what I want to stress about what is the central dogma of cancer is that in cancer, because cells are no longer behaving as they should, they're taking on different characteristics, they lose their normal structure, the cells lose their normal function, and instead what they do is they proliferate. What they do is they proliferate, and they will move. Things that really haven't happened in any big way since we're very early on. Okay? A lot of people think that most cancer occurs as a result of certain environmental assaults on the cell or lifestyle factors, and certainly smoking and a poor diet will certainly contribute to the development of cellular transformation. But I hate to say most cancers develop spontaneously as a result of mistakes made during DNA replication. Most cancers actually arise as a result of mutations that occur during DNA replication. So yes, tobacco, bad diet, etc. can contribute to higher risks of cancer. But again, most cancer actually happens as a result of damage to DNA that frequently happens during DNA replication, where certain mistakes in the chromosomes and those specific genes in the chromosomes are not corrected. So tumors develop from normal cells in their normal tissues. And what has to happen in this process? What has to happen in this process is what I described in our last lecture, where you will have genes that are encoding proteins that will activate the cell cycle. You'll also have genes that encode proteins that will regulate or called the cell cycle. And what will happen is there are going to be mutations that happen or there are mutations that happen in the genes that regulate the cell cycle and stop it, that can be repaired. And that's when a cell will take the first step toward what we call cancer. All right, and so what happens in cancer is that there's a breakdown of normal structure and function. So this is what you find in normal breast tissue. In normal breast tissue, you have milk ducts. The milk duct has a lumen, and surrounding the milk duct are epithelial cells. These epithelial cells, and then away from the epithelial layer, then you have what is called the stroma. The stroma is actually the connective tissue surrounding the duct. It's connective tissue. It's composed of collagen, fibronectin, other types of stromal components. This is called the extracellular matrix. And down in the stroma also, what you're going to have is you're going to have blood vessels. You're going to have blood vessels. You're going to have cells associated with the immune system, for example. And what happens? What happens when, say, for example, one of these epithelial cells becomes transformed? It's going to start to proliferate. It's going to start to proliferate, and it's going to fill this lumen. It's going to actually grow out, and it's going to, these cancer cells are going to be producing a lot of fibrin, and you'll go from normal-looking tissue to very abnormal tissue. This is a breast carcinoma. Okay? So you can see the difference. The normal tissue structure and its functions versus a tumor. Okay? There's a breakdown of normal structure and function of the tissue. Also, as I indicated in our last lecture, the difference between benign and malignant is tumors that are benign will stay in one place. They'll stay in one place. And that the term for a tumor staying in one place is called in situ, I-N-S-I-T-U, in situ. It stays in place, and that's benign. The other tumors are malignant. And it's the malignant tumors that are really most dangerous, although as I explained to you in our last lecture, can benign tumors kill you? Yeah. Absolutely. Depends on where they are. But they can be very dangerous. They have to be dealt with. Malignant tumors, on the other hand, are tumors out of control. Because what they've done is they've migrated elsewhere and set up secondary tumors throughout the body. And for example, what you're looking at here, these are mouse lungs. And in this case, the mouse was a cancer model for melanoma. And this is a normal mouse lung. But in melanoma, interestingly enough, the melanocytes that are the pigment cells in your skin, when they become transformed, they not only stay in your skin and form these dark, ugly moles, they also will travel through your body and do the same thing covering your internal organs. Okay? So for example, somebody who dies of a melanoma, if you do an autopsy, what you'll find is a situation very similar to what you're looking at here. There will actually be melanomas covering the liver, the lungs, the heart. Okay. So that's metastasis. Melanomas are dangerous because they're one of the most metastatic of all tumors. Okay. Tumors also have a tendency to migrate to very specific points. For example, breast tumors oftentimes will migrate to the brain. That's what you're looking at here. This is a postmortem of a breast cancer patient whose tumor had metastasized to the brain. So one thing that's interesting and has been studied very hard is why certain tumor types will migrate to certain sites. Like I said, breast tumors tend to migrate to the brain, to the liver, and to the bone marrow. Prostate cancer will migrate to the bone marrow, for example. It will also travel to the liver. All right, now I'm going to talk about the different categories of tumor. The first category I want to talk about is a tumor that's called a carcinoma. You've probably heard the term carcinoma before. Carcinoma is a tumor that has arisen from an epithelial cell. And if you recall, I've talked about epithelial cells throughout the course, but epithelial cells are the cells that cover our organs. They're the cells that line our gastrointestinal tract, our respiratory tract, the urinary tract. And when an epithelial cell becomes transformed and forms a tumor, it's called a carcinoma. It's called a carcinoma. And this is an electron micrograph of epithelial cells. They actually, like I said, will cover organs or line one of the tracts in the body. And underneath the epithelial cells, there's a basement membrane. And under the basement membrane, you have the stroma that I just described to you. The stroma is filled with components of the extracellular matrix, particularly collagen. And you also have blood vessels down in the stroma as well, feeding the overlying tissue. And what happens with a carcinoma? What happens with a carcinoma is as the carcinoma gets worse, what will happen is the transformed epithelial cell, or the carcinoma cell, will actually secrete what are called metalloproteinases, and they'll actually break down the tissue or the cell layer in the basement membrane and actually migrate down into the stroma, where the cancer cell will find a blood vessel and be able to get into the blood vessel to go throughout the body. And that's metastasis. That's metastasis. When the carcinoma stays where it is, that is a benign tumor, and it's in situ, a carcinoma in situ. Okay? All right. So where you find carcinomas? The tissue sites where you find carcinomas are lung, colon, breast, pancreas, stomach, esophagus, prostate, the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus, as well as the ovary. And what I want to point out about all of these tissues is they actually have built-in, they have ductal structures. All of these tissues that form carcinomas are tissues that have ductal structures. So this is an example of a milk duct that you would find in breast tissue, but all of these tissues, lung, colon, pancreas, stomach, esophagus, all of these actually have ductal structures in them. And it's the epithelial cells. It's the epithelial cells that are lining the ducts in these tissues that have a tendency to become transformed and turn into carcinomas. And a carcinoma that actually arises from an epithelial tissue that is lining a duct, that's called an adenocarcinoma. It's called an adenocarcinoma when the carcinoma cell comes from the epithelium that line the ducts. It's called an adenocarcinoma. Okay? We also have what are called squamous cell carcinomas. Squamous cell carcinomas are epithelial cells that are actually forming a protective layer. They're not lining a duct, but they're forming a protective layer. And so, consequently, the epithelial cells that are making up the skin, otherwise known as keratinocytes, these can develop into squamous cell carcinoma. The nasal cavity, the larynx, also in the esophagus, the cervix, for example. All of these are sites of what are called squamous cell carcinoma. And what I want to point out to you is the normal cross-section of tissue that you find in the cervix or also the skin, what I want to point out is that down in this region here, this is where you're going to find the stem cells. This is where you're going to find the stem cells that give rise to the epithelial cells that as the stem cells that are attached to the basement membrane, as these stem cells replicate or proliferate, what's going to happen is they push the newly developed cells up, 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 up. And as these cells migrate upward, they die and they flatten out. They're filled with keratin. And that's actually what forms the protective layer covering the cervix. It's the same kind of concept that forms our skin. We have a basement membrane. Attached to the basement membrane are stem cells that give rise to our basal keratinocytes, which are our skin cells. And as these stem cells replicate, they push the new skin cells up, up, up. And as the skin cells rise, they die. Because what they're actually away from the basement membrane. And that basement membrane is associated with stem cells that are receiving all kinds of growth factors. And as these cells, as they go away from the basement membrane, they differentiate into basal keratinocytes, and then they die. And as they die, they flatten out, and all that's left of the cells, which is actually the layer you're all looking at, is simply keratin. Okay? That's the normal structure and function of our skin, the normal structure and function of the cervix. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than what we were looking at with the ductal structure. So that's the difference between an adenocarcinoma is it arises from an epithelial cell that's forming a duct versus a squamous cell carcinoma, which actually arises from an epithelial cell that is forming a protective layer. Okay? Are we okay so far? Are you comfortable with this? Can we move on? Okay. All right. The next category that I want to talk about are the sarcomas. Sarcomas are tumors that arise from the mesodermal layer of your embryonic cell. And the mesoderm is this central layer of your early embryonic development. These cells in what is the mesodermal layer are going to go on to form bone. They're going to form fat. They're going to form the endothelial cells that form your vasculature and also your blood. They're going to form fibroblasts, which are the collagen-secreting cells that establish your extracellular matrix. And the mesodermal cells are going to develop into your muscle cells, or myocytes. And so any kind of tumor that arises from an osteoblast, or an adipocyte, or an angioblast, or a fibroblast, or a myocyte, any kind of tumor that arises from one of these cell types, which originated in the mesoderm, these are called sarcomas. That's why they're called sarcomas. So there's a difference between a sarcoma and a carcinoma. Can you see that? Now that I've explained it to you. This could actually pass for really gorgeous modern art, but it's actually a bone cancer. This is a liposarcoma. It's a tumor that you would find in an area of fat on the body, for example. Unfortunately, I don't have a slide that shows the normal tissue, which is what you really need to see to appreciate the normal loss of structure and function that you would get that leads to tumor formation. Okay. All right, so we've talked about the carcinomas, how you have a squamous cell carcinoma versus an adenocarcinoma. We've talked about the sarcomas. Now I want to talk a little bit about the diseases and the tumors of the blood. The tumors of the blood are called hematopoietic malignancies. Hematopoietic refers to blood. Hematopoietic tumors are automatically considered malignant Because what do blood cells do? They are moving. They are automatically on the move. So any kind of tumor that arises from one of the blood cells is considered a malignancy. And just to remind you, the blood cells that we're talking about are red blood cells or erythrocytes, leukocytes, and lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are your B and T cells. These are associated with what we would call adaptive immunity. The leukocytes are the white blood cells like macrophages, eosinophils, neutrophils, dendritic cells. All of these are actually involved in migrating through your tissues, looking for virally infected cells or bacteria, for example. That's how they function. And leukemias or lymphomas can come in two different flavors, chronic and acute. Chronic leukemia, such as chronic myelogenous leukemia or chronic lymphocytic leukemia, these can actually putter along for a number of years. These used to be called smoldering leukemia. They're chronic, means it takes a while. Acute leukemias, however, are very dangerous because they develop quickly. The patient starts to lose normal structure and function of their blood system, especially their immune system, and they die. One of the most dangerous is acute myelogenous leukemia. This is very difficult to treat, for example, and kills very quickly. And one of the distinctive aspects about the leukemias is you'll find an abnormal number of what we call undifferentiated cells in the bloodstream of the patient. So usually what will happen is a patient will come into the clinic, they're complaining of just being just exhausted all the time, dog-tired. And so you take a blood sample and you make a smear of the blood sample and you look at the cells. You look at the cell types that are in the patient's blood. And what you'll find is that instead of finding primarily erythrocytes spattered with a collection of leukocytes, maybe some lymphocytes, instead what you'll see in a patient that has a lymphoma or a leukemia is you'll see a preponderance of undifferentiated, large nuclei, undifferentiated cells. And that's a leukemia. That's how it's identified, is by a blood smear. Then you have to do other tests to determine what kind of leukemia it is. Is it a lymphocytic leukemia, a myelogenous leukemia? Myeloid refers to both the leukocytes and the progenitor of the erythrocytes. Okay? Can I say anything again or explain anything again? You okay? Okay. The next type of tumor are neuroepidermal tumors. Your nervous tissue and your skin actually arise from the ectodermal layer of your embryonic cell. And neural tissues include neurons, as well as the support cells for neurons, and that would be astrocytes that you find in the brain, glial cells that you find in the brain, and also Schwann cells that wrap around the axons of our nerves to allow for proper transmission of nerve signals. And this is a very nice example of how transformed cells can lose their normal structure and function. This is a normal brain section where you're looking at the astrocytes. These are support cells for neurons. They're associated with surrounding neurons. And this is normal structure and function. And when these cells become transformed into tumor cells, you lose this normal structure and function, and instead you simply have a cell that is undergoing rapid proliferation. Instead of establishing normal tissue-specific gene expression profile and establishing normal structure, carrying out normal function. Instead, what you have is a tissue mass of proliferating cells. Okay? So remember when I was telling you in our last lecture that we have genes that encode proteins that push the cell into the cell cycle. Then we have genes that encode proteins that control the cell cycle. And one of the most important proteins that carries out that role is the retinoblastoma protein. It's the checkpoint, if you recall. It's the G1 checkpoint. And what happens? What happens when you have a mutation in the gene that encodes the retinoblastoma protein is you develop a retinoblastoma. Retinoblastoma is actually a childhood tumor. This is a childhood tumor.